Seven Senses, The Three Sacred Treasures Civilization Theory. Episode 2. Why do relationships become more fragile? The closer we get, the structure of inner unrest and distance. A love that hurts. Late at night. No reply. You keep checking your phone. Your chest tightens. Maybe they hate me now. That feeling fills your mind. You don't want to be apart. You want to stay together forever. And yet, the more important the relationship becomes, the more painful it feels. Why do relationships with intense attraction so often fall apart? It is not because the love was weak. In fact, the opposite may be true. The more inwardly restless a person feels, the more intensely they may be drawn toward someone else. This episode explores love through the lens of inner unrest and distance. What is love? Is it becoming one, or is it remaining different? While still being able to coexist, people seek connection most strongly when they feel emotionally adrift. And yet, sometimes, the closer we get, the more painful things become. What was really happening inside fate? When someone feels emotionally adrift, the structure underneath is actually quite simple. It is the fear of losing connection, that feeling of suddenly being left alone, that sensation of the world becoming unstable. It resembles the emotional state of an infant, separated from its parent. They might leave me. I might be abandoned. Those feelings exist deep inside. And in that state, people do not move closer simply because they love. Rather, the more afraid they are of losing someone, the tighter they try to hold on. This point is important. The moment someone feels, I'm lonely, I'm anxious, their actions may no longer be pure love itself, but rather an attempt to calm inner unrest. In other words, inner unrest itself can take the shape of love. This is often the hidden structure behind intensely addictive relationships. Why does the attraction become so strong? Why does the attraction become so overwhelming? The answer is simple. Because the moment inner emptiness is temporarily filled, people feel immense relief. That relief feels overwhelmingly powerful. Finally, someone understands me. Maybe this person can erase this emptiness inside me. That feeling can feel like salvation. And so people begin to think, this is the only person for me. That is why even painful relationships become difficult to leave. But here lies the major trap. That sense of stability is not being created internally. It is being created by the other person. A single text message can feel like heaven or hell. A slight change in tone can either stabilize or destroy you. Which means, when they are there, you feel stable. When they change, you collapse. At that point, the relationship is already unstable. Perhaps the real issue is not whether love exists or not, but rather a collapse in the configuration of desire, the structure of excessive closeness. When inner unrest becomes strong, people begin to behave in predictable ways, wanting to always be together, increasing contact frequency, constantly checking reactions, becoming hypersensitive to small changes. In the short term, this creates relief, but that relief is built upon dependency on the other person. And this is the core issue. You feel safe, yet simultaneously suffer. What is happening is not necessarily love itself, but rather a connection supported by instability. The more a relationship creates safety through closeness, the more it collapses the moment distance appears, because that safety depends entirely on the presence of the other person. In other words, trying to feel safe through closeness can unintentionally create a relationship designed to break. This is the pattern of dependency-based love. What is distance? Distance does not mean separation. Distance means not losing yourself, even when the other person is absent. Truly stable relationships are not built upon always being together. They are built upon not collapsing even when apart. Paradoxically, the healthiest relationships are often the ones capable of allowing distance. Perhaps real stability in love is not becoming one, but rather remaining different, while still being able to coexist. In Seven Senses, the integration state means allowing differences to coexist without destruction. Relationships without distance may appear deeply united, but often become situations where inner emptiness and emotional deficiency are continuously filled through the other person. That is why even small separation becomes painful. Which means the true source of suffering is not depth of love, but unstable fusion. When dependency becomes control, without realizing it, love can slowly transform into control. inner unrest, closeness, relief, dependency, control, friction, distance, loneliness. At first, it appears as though love is deepening, but in reality, it may become closeness shaped by inner unrest. For example, testing behavior, unconscious possessiveness, excessive expectations, obsessive checking of replies, extreme sensitivity to small changes. At first it was, because I love you, but eventually it becomes, why don't you understand me? A delayed reply becomes painful. A slightly colder attitude feels world-shattering. Eventually, your emotions become controlled by the other person's reactions. You love them, yet simultaneously restrict their freedom. At that moment, the relationship changes. I want to be with you becomes, I cannot let you go. And the quality of the relationship fundamentally transforms. Mutual control. Meanwhile, the other person also begins suffering. They want to love you, yet they must constantly absorb your inner unrest. They want to support you, but it becomes heavy. That contradiction creates distance, which intensifies emotional imbalance even further. And once again, the person moves closer. In other words, the relationship that was supposed to create safety slowly becomes the relationship that can no longer sustain itself, and the loop continues. Inner unrest, control, resistance, distance, loneliness. It does not stop. And what remains in the end is two people hurting each other while believing they are loving each other. This is the moment. Dependency transforms into control. The issue here is not who is wrong. The real question is how inner unrest is being handled inside the relationship. That is where the flow exists. And this is not something that only happens to weak people. When people become emotionally ungrounded, anyone can fall into this state. In other words, this is also a natural human response, psychological validation, and this is not merely emotional speculation. Psychology has repeatedly observed these same patterns. The more afraid people are of losing someone, the closer they move. Psychology calls this attachment theory. The more afraid people are of loss, the tighter they try to hold on. Even a delayed message can trigger, maybe they don't love me anymore. And so they repeatedly seek reassurance. Perhaps some behaviors believed to be love are actually attempts to calm inner unrest. When closeness becomes excessive, boundaries disappear. Psychology calls this codependency. When people become too close, their boundaries disappear. Constant messaging, always together. It appears ideal, but the moment distance appears, loneliness and suspicion emerge. And eventually, fighting, possessiveness, control, collapse. In other words, trying to create safety through closeness creates the very structure that breaks the relationship. Inner unrest eventually becomes control. At first it sounds like, I'm only asking because I care. But eventually it becomes, where are you? Why didn't you reply? At that point, what is occurring is control driven by inner unrest. People place their inner unrest onto others. Psychology calls this projection. Why don't you understand me? The hidden meaning is often, I am emotionally adrift, but eventually it becomes, you are the problem. Which means their inner unrest is being projected onto the other person. The issue is not the partner. It is where emotions are being placed. Stability is created through distance. Healthy relationships contain boundaries, personal time, no surveillance, freedom, not carrying the other person's emotions excessively, which means being able to feel safe, even when apart. True stability is maintained not through closeness, but through distance. Relationships change, depending on how inner unrest is managed. The issue is not that inner unrest exists. Inner unrest itself is natural. The problem begins when someone continuously tries to fill that unrest through another person. With the same inner unrest, one person learns to regulate themselves, while another attempts to control others. That difference determines whether a relationship stabilizes or collapses. In other words, love changes depending on where inner unrest is processed. Connection to seven senses. Seven senses is a framework for transforming multiple forms of good, from conflict into arrangement. From the perspective of seven senses, these collapses occur through specific desire configurations. When belonging becomes excessive, connection turns into dependency. When order becomes weak, boundaries disappear. And when self is underdeveloped, people cannot maintain themselves independently. Life, fear of abandonment, order, boundary maintenance, belonging, desire for connection, self-individuality and selfhood, justice, idealized views of love, reason, structural understanding. And integration means preserving differences while arranging and operating them without collapse. The issue is not whether love exists. The issue is how desires are arranged, which means the real issue is not emotion, nor the partner, but desire configuration itself. Love is not determined merely by emotional intensity. It is also shaped by the arrangement of desire and distance. And this structure does not exist only in romance. The more emotionally unstable people become, the more relationships can shift from support into attachment and fixation. This happens in families, organizations, and even societies. Human beings do not become stable by erasing differences. They become capable of coexistence by preserving differences. Seven Senses attempts to understand that arrangement itself. Stable relationships. Perhaps truly stable relationships are not relationships where people complete each other, but rather relationships where people can remain together without destroying one another. Love may not be about becoming one. It may be about remaining whole while staying together. Relationships that endure require distance. Next episode, Episode 3, Solutions. How does love change when viewed through seven senses? From dependency toward distance that allows coexistence.